Hey everyone. So we're going to do an update in this video on the Straits of Hormuz, the negotiations. We're going to focus heavily on the Straits of Hormuz, but really on the state of play right now and how the Iranians are reacting to Trump's current statements and moves. That's what we're going to be doing here. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with a little clip of President Trump talking about why he's held off on the next wave of attacks and is going back to negotiations. Here we go.
Saudi Arabia, UAE, by Qatar, and by Iran. We were all set to go just about at this time right now, and it would have been a massive attack. We were all set to go, but when the allies ask to call it off, you got to sort of say, well, let's see. And the reason they asked is I think there's a deal. There's a deal on Hormuz, and then there will be a deal on the nuclear, or you might call it the denuclearization of Iran. I call it the denuclearization of Iran. So we're holding it. We'll just see. We can do it anytime we want. But we're asked by the three primary groups. We're also asked by Iran, very strongly, actually. They said, we'd like to make a deal. Now, I don't know what they say, because a lot of times they'll say that to me, and then they'll go out and say, we don't know what he's talking about. Obviously, they don't want to be attacked. And they knew the extent of the attack because they saw it forming.
Okay, so that's Trump, and what does he say? He says there's a deal. He says that the Arab states asked him to hold off, and that's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and you might wonder, wait a second, don't they hate Iran? This is an old talking point, just to go over something I've said many, many times from the beginning of the war. As much as the Saudis, the UAE, Qatar's in a different category, they've been protecting the Iranian regime, but as much as these countries hate Iran and Iran's been attacking them, they do not want the regime to fall. They want it to be weak. They want it not to be a threat to them, but they do not want it to fall. They certainly do not want it to be replaced by a pro-Western, open, free, democratic society where Christians have rights, etc. They don't want that. It would threaten their countries, their regimes in a number of different ways. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out as the regime gets closer to actual collapse. But Trump also said there that he believes there's a deal on the Strait of Hormuz. He's going to give it a chance. But then he also hedged at the end, saying that you never know with them about, often it's happened where they say there's a deal and then there's really no deal. Look, there's never a deal. They don't want a deal. They want to negotiate. That is the slogan. I should print up bumper stickers that we should put on all our cars that say, no, President Trump. They don't want a deal. They want to negotiate. It's as simple as that. Wanting to negotiate and wanting a deal are not the same thing. All right, let's get into some of the reactions of the Iranians to all of this. So, claims of Iran, sure enough, this is basically what Trump said. This is from yesterday. Claims of Iran agreeing to reopen Strait of Hormuz are false. Iranian informed sources have rejected reports claiming that the Islamic Republic has agreed to a plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, stressing that there has been no change in Tehran's policy regarding the strategic waterway. A source close to Iran's nuclear negotiating team denied reports suggesting that Tehran had reached an agreement on opening the Straits of Hormuz, saying that Iran had made no such deal and that the reports are false. That's an informed military source also dismissed the reports. The source said that as long as what he described as hostile actions by the U.S. continue, the situation in the strategic waterway will remain unchanged. Vessels will only be allowed to pass through if they coordinate with the IRGC. Iranian sources emphasize that claims about Tehran approving any plan to reopen the Straits of Hormuz are inaccurate. It's just over and over again. That's the whole point of this. No. That's the point of this story. I could have said it in one sentence. Iran signals breakthrough in Oman talks over Hormuz management. Iran said on Sunday, yesterday, it was on the verge of reaching an agreement with Oman on the future of management of the Strait of Hormuz, describing bilateral negotiations as being in their final phase as Tehran seeks to establish a new framework for navigation through the strategic waterway. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told a cabinet meeting that discussions with Muscat, that's Oman's capital, had made significant progress and were nearing completion, according to Iran's official IRNA news agency. Although he offered no timetable for signing an agreement, The announcement marks Tehran's strongest indication yet that months of negotiations are approaching a conclusion. Foreign Minister spokesman Ismail Baghai said the talks were exclusively between Iran and Oman and did not involve any third party. Interesting statement, right? He's saying this has nothing to do with the United States, nothing to do with other countries. According to Baghai, the negotiations stem from Article 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding reached with the United States to end the recent conflict, which envisages Iran assuming responsibility for the future management of the Strait of Hormuz, which it does. It's one of the, maybe the biggest flaw in that MOU. I mean, there's a number of massive flaws. I don't know. We could rank them. But one of the biggest flaws in that MOU is that it literally concedes the point that Iran will control the strait, will have management, will be involved in the management of the strait, basically meaning that they're gonna get to control it. So they're saying, yeah, we're just following the MOU, right? Because it says that they'll have future management of the Strait of Hormuz in consultation with Oman and in dialogue with regional states. He stressed that agreement on a new shipping corridor should not be interpreted as a decision on whether the Strait of Hormuz would remain open or closed, saying the navigation framework and broader security policy were separate issues. The Islamic Republic of Iran acts according to the country's interests and considerations and will not change its decisions under the influence or threats or intimidation. He added that Britain, Bulgaria, and Ukraine had contacted Tehran during the previous 24 hours to state that they would play no role in any potential U.S. military operation against Iran. There was no immediate confirmation from those governments. Oman has yet to comment publicly. Okay. This story that I just read to you is from today. Okay, so this is current. This is after Trump said that there's a deal on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is doing exactly what he said they would do. They're saying, no, there's no such deal. Baghai, the foreign ministry spokesman, Strait of Hormuz will not return to its pre-war status. Any future mechanism for managing the strategic waterway must respect Iran's sovereign rights. Under no circumstances will it return to the situation of before February 28th. We must ensure that the Strait of Hormuz cannot be misused by parties that have committed aggression against Iran. This requires a mechanism in which Iran's sovereign rights are fully respected, meaning sovereign rights that we control it. In another part of his remarks, Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson addressed threats by U.S. officials against Iran, saying such statements were not new and that Tehran had already faced military actions. In other words, when America makes threats now, the Iranian attitude towards those threats is, we don't care about your threats. And we'll get into that more in a little bit. The United States threats aren't working. It's as simple as that. We have faced more than threats. The United States has carried out 2, and in a sense, 3 high-intensity military aggressions against Iran. We've gone through those stages. Commenting on U.S. President Donald Trump's claims that Iran had sought to stop attacks, Baghai said such statements had repeatedly proven to be unfounded and described the use of social media as part of psychological and media warfare. He added that past experience shows that threats and media pressure would not force Iran to abandon its positions. We'll get back to American threats in a little bit, in a couple minutes. But just more on the Straits of Hormuz. Qatar LNG carrier stalls after U.S. escort in Strait of Hormuz. A Qatar-flagged liquefied natural gas carrier that attempted to pass through the southern route of the Strait of Hormuz under U.S. escort has been stopped and remains stranded along the same route. This has only been, I've only seen this reported in Iranian state media, so let's take it with a big grain of salt. According to satellite tracking data released by the maritime monitoring account Manch Ocean, the Qatari LNG vessel has dropped anchor and halted in the southern part of the Strait of Hormuz. The report said the vessel was under U.S. escort on Friday night, July 31st, when it was targeted while attempting to transit the strategic waterway. Earlier, 2 oil tankers were targeted in the southern route of the Strait of Hormuz in Omani waters on early Saturday. The southern route that's the one that runs along the Omani coast that the Iranians say no one is allowed to use, and that's where they attack ships going through there. One was located 11 nautical miles northeast of Lima, while the other was 21 nautical miles northeast of Kasab. A source familiar with the matter said the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. A source familiar with the matter, meaning they're saying the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, warning that vessels attempting to pass through unauthorized and unsafe routes. Why are they unsafe? They're unsafe because you're firing on them. Outside the routes announced by Iran without coordination with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy will inevitably face incidents. Right, and then we have, this is just literally from the last few hours from today on Monday, U.S. conducts aerial escort operations near Strait of Hormuz. And this is, again, in Iranian state media. The increased activity of U.S. military support aircraft over the Persian Gulf indicates that Washington may once again be seeking to facilitate passage of vessels through the southern part of the strait without Iranian oversight. And basically warning them. And then they also say here that this is also from today, IRGC Air Force downs MQ-9 Reaper drone over Strait of Hormuz. So this is very, very far from the Iranians saying, okay, we're willing to make a deal on the Strait of Hormuz. They're doubling down. Now, on the American threat issue, take a look at this piece. Very interesting piece that was posted in WANA yesterday, late last night. Trump's repeated Iran threats and sudden U-turns. And the whole point of this piece is to say, we don't really take Trump's threats seriously anymore. Check that out. Since the beginning of 2026, U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly issued harsh threats against Iran, warning that critical infrastructure, including power plants, oil facilities, bridges, and strategic sites, could be targeted. However, in several cases, these threats were followed by a retreat, extensions of deadlines, or a shift in position rather than the implementation of the announced actions. And now it goes through a whole bunch of examples. This is worth making note of. The first major instance occurred on March 21st, 2026, when Trump threatened to target Iran's energy infrastructure if the Strait of Hormuz was not fully reopened. He stated, if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, we will destroy Iran's power plants, starting with the largest ones. Despite the initial deadline, the time frame was later extended, first by 5 days, and then by another week, while no large-scale military action against Iran's power infrastructure followed. And then on April 21st, 2026, Trump escalated his rhetoric again, warning if Hormuz is not reopened immediately, we will completely destroy all power plants, oil wells, and Kark Island. He also warned that Iran would face devastating consequences, but the threatened escalation did not immediately occur. On April 27th, 2026, Trump issued another warning saying, tonight an entire civilization will be destroyed. The statement triggered international reactions, with human rights groups warning about the potential humanitarian consequences of threats targeting civilian infrastructure. A day later, reports emerged of a ceasefire agreement between the two sides, mediated by Pakistan. On April 13th, Trump again referred to Iranian infrastructure, saying if they do not open the Straits of Hormuz, they will live in hell. Tuesday will be the day of power plants and bridges in Iran. Earlier on March 31st, he had warned after the bridges, it will be the power plants. And on April 6th, he had warned that within 1 hour, by destroying power plants and bridges, I can send Iran back to the Stone Age. And then on June 17th, 2026, Trump issued another threat, stating from now on, every time Iran attacks ships, we will destroy one Iranian bridge or power plant. And then on July 22nd, he warned if no agreement is reached, we will target bridges, power plants, and even hardened facilities. The latest example came on August 2nd, yesterday, when Trump again spoke of military readiness and possible action, but the escalation was halted afterwards. What they are saying is we don't take these threats seriously anymore. He's threatening and threatening. Now, I've said, and I'm going to keep saying it, it's the wrong threat. Stop threatening the power plants and the bridges. Threaten the IRGC, threaten the leadership. That would work more effectively, maybe, maybe not. But you see here that Iran, part of Iran's messaging now, and you saw it in Baghai's statement also, we've dealt with threats, is that they're basically saying America is weak, America lacks direction, lacks focus, they're unwilling to win. An unwillingness to vanquish your enemy is viewed as weakness by the Iranians. I talked about this in that article that I've mentioned a few times by Harold Rode, the great Middle East scholar, former Pentagon advisor for decades, who wrote a phenomenal article about 15 years ago called "The Sources of Iranian Negotiating Strategy," explaining how Iranians negotiate. And one of the things he explained there about how they think is that if you have the ability to destroy me and you don't, that means that maybe you don't have the ability, or maybe you simply lack the will, and that's a sign of weakness. And that's how they're looking at the Americans right now. And you see this in another article they posted earlier today. So this is a day after the previous one. 8 key points behind Trump's hesitation over military action against Iran. And the whole thing is about how Trump is getting skittish and hesitant. I'll just look at the headline line items here. Trump's doubts over launching major war with Iran, and this is how he doubts whether it'll actually be successful. His the military plan is finalized. Well, these are kind of the same. One of them is what the consequences will be, and one of them is whether it'll be successful. That he doubts whether it, again, will accomplish the goal at all. Strong concerns among Arab states over a new war. So that's also a reason that Trump is hesitating. Arab states are urging Washington to continue diplomacy. Military threats remain with the possibility of strategic deception, despite signs suggesting a possible reduction in the likelihood of war. Military threats against Iran remain in place. In other words, there's all these threats. Some analysts believe that means that this is what they're pushing is that part of the current atmosphere could be aimed at applying psychological pressure, gaining political leverage. Talks continue through Oman. Netanyahu is pushing for attacks, but Iran has deterrence capabilities. But this whole article, the whole point of this piece is that Trump is being hesitant and he's timid and he's afraid and he's being pressured. So you see where their messaging is going. And now I don't understand at this point why the Americans would take seriously at all that these Arab states are saying to them, Iran wants to negotiate. Iran wants a deal. We have a deal on the straits. The fact that Trump actually on Air Force One in that clip I started with said, I think it was yesterday, that, there's a deal in place for the Straits of Hormuz and that we're going to go with that. It's crazy to me because we know exactly what they're doing. They're kicking the can down the road. With every passing day we get closer to the midterms. We are not closer one iota to the opening of the Straits of Hormuz or to the solving of the nuclear issue. And to close out this conversation on the Straits of Hormuz, once we're discussing it, I found this very interesting article, which was actually just published today in Al-Majalla, Getting the Oil Out, Exploring Hormuz Alternatives. Al-Majalla looks at potential new export routes that big oil producers can use to offset Iran's control over key waterways. The U.S. and Arabian Gulf countries are leveraging. Now, if you stuck around the video long enough for this, you win, because this is the most interesting part of this video, in my opinion. So settle in. Maybe you can pause it and get a drink. It won't be that long, but this is a very interesting story here about all the things that are in the works to make the Straits of Hormuz less important. Now, this is more of a long-term play. We've talked about this in some other contexts, some of the things that other nations are doing, but this article really kind of put it together. The U.S. and Arabian Gulf countries are leveraging their political and financial clout to expedite oil pipeline projects, aiming to bypass blockages caused by the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, even though the new conduits may not constitute a full remedy. Military and diplomatic attempts to restore free shipping have stalled, prompting crude exporters in the region, such as Iraq, to carve out new pathways for their oil and gas, which would be worth tens of billions of dollars. Saudi Arabia has already been rerouting up to 7 million barrels of oil per day through an east-west pipeline connecting its eastern province oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. This conduit was built long before the war to avoid being at Iran's mercy, and events have proven it to have been a wise undertaking. Riyadh is now considering an expansion of the pipeline's capacity. Let me just point out what that is. Yanbu. So here's Saudi Arabia. Here's Iran. Here's the Straits of Hormuz. Yanbu is right here. It's right near Medina. Here's the city of Medina. Yanbu is the port near there. That's Yanbu port right there. You see where that is? That's Yanbu. And Riyadh's and the Saudi oil fields are in the eastern, mostly in the eastern part of the country. And what they're doing is they created this east-west pipeline that, rather than bringing the oil out the short way to the Strait of Hormuz, is sending it out to Yanbu, and then to go to the east, it goes down through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and out. And that's why the Houthis are trying to cut them off at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or can go out through the Suez Canal. So that's what he's referring to there. This conduit was built long before the war. Right. Okay. Now, on 27th of July, so last week, 28 ships crossed the Red Sea entrance, roughly half the normal amount, said Ryan Bohl, a Middle East North Africa analyst at business risk consultant RANE. After the Saudis bombed a Yemeni port's runway, the Houthis responded by saying they would specifically target Saudi ships. Okay, so this is what's happening down here. The Houthis are disrupting shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and they're trying to cut off Saudi Arabia's ability to get oil out. Okay, that's what that's all about. Corey Ranslam, CEO of Maritime Security Group, said the impact had been huge. Since the Houthis started their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea with the hijacking of Galaxy Leader back in November of 2023, we've seen a substantial drop in ship traffic. So this isn't just about the Iran war. This goes back to right after October 7th, when the Houthis started acting up and they hijacked a ship in the Red Sea. There's already been a substantial drop in the traffic. We estimate it dropped by around 80 to 85%. We've seen some traffic recover and then drop off again after the recent attacks. With the current threat in the region, a number of shippers are still taking the longer way around the Cape of Good Hope, and we expect that to continue for the foreseeable future. The Cape of Good Hope is down here. Whoa. Here, this is the Cape of Good Hope. Cape of Good Hope is down here to go all the way down around. So that's what some other shippers are doing. They want to avoid the whole thing. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's get back to the article. The United Arab Emirates is a major oil exporter that recently left the oil cartel OPEC to allow it to increase crude exports. Unlike Saudi Arabia, the Emirates did not have a ready alternative to the Strait of Hormuz, so it has unveiled major investments to end its reliance on the vulnerable waterway. We are moving toward having zero Hormuz dependency, the UAE Minister of Foreign Trade, Thani Al-Zioudi, told Bloomberg in June. And yeah, here we go. DP World, a global logistics firm based in Abu Dhabi, and Fujairah Ports Authority recently announced an agreement to build 2 deep water terminals on the UAE's eastern coast of the Gulf of Oman, away from Hormuz. Expansions at the ports of Diba and Khor Fakkan on the same coastline are also planned. In tandem, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company is developing a pipeline to double crude exports via Fujairah. Let me show that to you on the map. Let's go over to the Emirates. Here we are. So Fujairah is right here. And the other 2 sites that they mention here, Diba and Khor Fakkan. Diba and Khor Fakkan are right near the tip of this is Emirates territory here. So we have, again, Fujairah, Khor Fakkan, Diba. So they're looking at expanding the ports right here, and that would allow. And this is outside the Straits of Hormuz. This allows you to get oil out, and the UAE does have a pipeline that cuts across from their oil fields over to Fujairah to get their oil out. The UAE's current main pipeline links Habshan to Fujairah. Right, Habshan is down in this area here. It's around here, Habshan. So it links Habshan to Fujairah, and has a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day. Like Yanbu, Fujairah offers a direct route to Asia, but is within range of Iran. Fujairah will be a good way to get goods around Hormuz when the threat is focused on the waterways and not on the UAE itself. See, because the Iranians have bombed Fujairah a few times. They've tried to hit it because they don't want, for the same reason that the Houthis have been trying to hit Yanbu and are cutting off shipping. They're trying to cut off the alternative routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. It will be less viable if Iran resumes attacks on the UAE, and likely a primary target for Iranian strikes if their goal is to interrupt alternative routes. There you go. In other words, yes, the UAE is building these other ports, and they're going to want to use them for other nations also, and they'll make money off it and give everyone the option to have a different way out of the Strait of Hormuz. The only problem is that it's so close to Iran. I mean, this is Iran right here. It's right across. Fujairah is right across from Iran. This is Iran. So it's so close to Iran that it's not that safe, meaning it's not a real bypass, because if they start striking the UAE, if Iran starts striking the UAE, they'll hit that too. Iraq is another major oil exporter that is keen to bypass Hormuz, on which it primarily relied to ship its crude before the Iran war. Okay, so Iraq, let's just get our bearings. This is Iraq. Here's Iraq. So Iraq primarily shipped its oil also through the Persian Gulf out to the Strait of Hormuz. That's the quickest way to go to the east. That's where, to go to China, to go out to Asia. That's where the oil goes. And so Iraq has this little, you see, there's this little piece here that's Iraq. Iraq borders on the Persian. This is the Iraq opening on the Persian Gulf. This is how they were getting their oil out. But now they're looking at alternate routes. The White House and American energy companies, including Chevron, are considering a pipeline connecting Syria with Iraq. Before the war, Iraq was OPEC's second largest oil producer. Look at that. And is hoping to increase its export quota. I mean, it's a mess of a country, but it really has a lot of resources. It could be a wealthy country. U.S. President Donald Trump has developed a relationship with both Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara and Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi. So this could accelerate the project's implementation. Interesting. So the United States, so Trump's whole strategy with these shady characters in Iraq and Syria is also to help facilitate, perhaps, a pipeline that goes from Iraq to Syria. Okay, and we're going to see where this goes in a minute. For the U.S., the pipeline means a large portion of Iraqi oil will be released into international markets through Syria's Mediterranean coast, helping cool crude prices and easing the burden on American voters. The Kirkuk-Banyas pipeline has been shut for more than 2 decades, but Iraq and Syria will work jointly to rehabilitate and operate it, said the U.S. State Department. It could transport up to 2 million. It could transport up to 2 million barrels per day, more than half of Iraq's overall pre-war exporting rates once operational. Let's take a look at what that would be. So this here, this is Banyas, this red marker, and Kirkuk is right here. There's Kirkuk. So Kirkuk to Banyas means basically this is how the pipeline would run from Iraq across through Syria. Another option is Turkey, which reportedly wants to increase the capacity of a pipeline from Iraq's Kurdistan region to the Turkish port of Ceyhan on the Mediterranean. The Turkish port of Ceyhan is right up in here in this little inlet. Okay, this is where Ceyhan is. Oops, here's Ceyhan. So there's a Turkish port here. So they want to make a pipeline that goes across from Iraq into Turkey through to Ceyhan. Its full capacity would be 1.5 million barrels per day, nearly tripling the current rates. And then it talks about how there's a current rivalry between Israel and Turkey. Risks of strikes aside, and all the alternatives may not fully compensate for the crude that once shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. You need to move around 20 to 25 million barrels per day to match it. It will take a significant amount of time and cost to build this type of pipeline infrastructure, but all of this helps. Anyway, that's the current state of play in the Strait of Hormuz. Bottom line is this: short term, I don't think Iran's about to make a deal. This is more of the same, only it gets, the stakes get higher and higher. The risk gets higher and higher for the Americans as we get closer to the midterms. And we see how the Iranians are reacting. And at the same time, in the long term, we see that all of these countries are realizing, all of these oil producing states are rapidly building out different alternatives to get oil out that does not involve the Strait of Hormuz. So in the long-term sense, Iran is a bit of an own goal, because Iran's leverage over the international economy, over the oil market, is going to be diminished as time goes on, as these alternatives in the Straits of Hormuz get built. Okay, so we'll see where this goes, where this negotiation phase goes. I think ultimately the real power struggle here, it's not America getting duped by Iran. It's America looking at Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, these various partners who they do want to have good relations with, who are saying to Trump, hey, look, we don't actually want you to go further here against Iran. But at the same time, America's strategic goals vis-a-vis Iran, its stated goals for this whole war, can't really be achieved without going further against Iran. So that's where I see the point of tension that we are currently in, and that is going to continue to ratchet up in the days ahead. All right, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. God bless.